Hi everyone, I'm Emma.
I'm Jack.
Welcome to our channel.
Have you ever noticed that you behave differently when you're traveling?
Definitely, I didn't really notice it until a few years ago, but I'm almost a different person when I'm somewhere I've never been before.
What changes?
I'm more willing to talk to strangers, I'm more curious, I try foods I'd normally ignore, I'll walk around for hours without knowing exactly where I'm going, and somehow, things that would annoy me at home don't bother me as much when I'm traveling.
That's interesting, so you become more adventurous.
A little, maybe not adventurous in the traditional sense. I'm not suddenly climbing mountains or jumping out of airplanes, but I'm more willing to say, let's try it.
I know what you mean. At home, I can spend 20 minutes deciding whether I want to try a new restaurant. When I'm traveling, I'll see something I've never eaten before and think, why not?
Exactly, it's almost like the normal rules disappear.
Maybe because you're already outside your normal routine.
That could be part of it. At home, everything is familiar. You know where the supermarket is, you know which bus to take, you know which coffee shop you like, and you probably know what you're going to do tomorrow.
When you're traveling, none of that is guaranteed.
Right, you wake up and you don't know exactly what the day is going to look like.
And that can be exciting.
It can also be exhausting.
That's true.
People sometimes talk about travel as if every moment is magical. You see beautiful pictures online, everyone looks happy, and it seems like traveling is just walking around beautiful places and eating amazing food.
But then reality arrives.
Exactly, your suitcase is too heavy, your train is delayed, you can't find the hotel, your phone battery is at 3%, it's raining, you don't understand the ticket machine. And suddenly you're standing in a train station, wondering why you thought traveling was a good idea.
I've been there.
I'm sure everyone has.
Actually, one of my strangest travel experiences happened because I misunderstood a sign.
What happened?
I was in a city I'd never visited before. I had arrived late in the afternoon and I wanted to get to my hotel before it got dark. I thought I understood the public transportation system, so I got on a train that looked right.
That sentence already sounds dangerous.
The train was going in the wrong direction.
How long did it take you to realize?
About 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
I kept thinking maybe this is just a different route. Then I looked at the map again and realized I was moving farther and farther away from the center.
What did you do?
I got off at the next station and tried to figure out how to go back.
Were you worried?
A little, but something strange happened. A woman at the station noticed that I was looking confused. She asked if I needed help.
In English.
Yes, she wasn't a native English speaker either, but her English was good enough. I showed her the name of my hotel and she explained which train I needed.
That's one of those moments when you suddenly appreciate a stranger.
Absolutely, and that's something I notice when traveling. People can be surprisingly helpful.
Especially when they realize you're lost.
Yes, sometimes you don't even have to ask.
I've had that happen too. I was standing outside a bus station staring at my phone, and an older man walked over and asked me where I was trying to go.
Did he speak English?
Not really.
So how did you communicate?
A combination of simple words, pointing, gestures, and my phone.
The international language of travel.
Exactly, I showed him the address, he looked at it, pointed down the street, and then made a gesture that I understood as keep going.
And did you trust him?
I did.
Were you right too?
Yes, I eventually found the place.
That's another interesting thing about traveling. You become comfortable communicating without perfect language.
That's true.
At home, if you're speaking your own language, you may expect yourself to communicate perfectly.
You notice every mistake.
Exactly, but when you're traveling, you realize that communication doesn't require perfect grammar.
You just need to get the message across.
Right.
If I need to find the train station, I don't need to produce a beautiful sentence. I can say, "Excuse me, station," and point at the map.
And the other person usually understands.
Maybe they'll answer with a long explanation that I don't understand.
That's when you smile and ask them to repeat it,
Or they start speaking more slowly.
which helps.
Sometimes.
Travel can teach you to be less embarrassed about making mistakes.
I'd agree.
Because when you're in an unfamiliar place, you don't have much choice.
You have to communicate.
Exactly, you can't spend 10 minutes thinking about whether your sentence is grammatically perfect when your train leaves in 5 minutes.
That's a very good language learning lesson.
It is, real situations force you to use what you know.
Even if what you know isn't much.
And sometimes you discover that what you know is enough.
That's important.
A lot of language learners underestimate themselves because they're comparing their speaking to a native speaker.
But when you actually need to use the language, you realize that simple English can solve a lot of problems.
Exactly, "where is the station?" can be more useful than knowing a complicated sentence you never use.
And "could you help me?" can open a lot of doors.
Definitely.
There's another thing that changes when I travel.
What's that?
My relationship with time.
How so?
At home, I'm always checking the clock. I have appointments, meetings, errands, deadlines. When I'm traveling, I still have schedules, but sometimes I forget about them.
Unless you're trying to catch a train.
That's different.
Very different.
But if I have a free afternoon, I might spend 2 hours sitting somewhere just watching people.
Would you normally do that at home?
Almost never.
Why not?
I suppose it feels unproductive.
That's interesting.
At home, if I'm sitting somewhere doing nothing, part of me thinks I should be doing something else.
But when you're traveling, doing nothing can become part of the experience.
Exactly, sitting in a square, drinking coffee, watching people walk past. You don't need a reason.
Maybe because you're not trying to maintain your normal routine.
Maybe.
I also think unfamiliar places make us pay more attention.
Yes.
At home, you can walk down the same street 100 times and barely notice it.
But if you're in another city, every building looks interesting.
You notice the signs, the doors, the windows, the street names, the way people cross the road.
Even supermarkets become interesting.
That's true.
I once spent almost an hour in a supermarket while traveling.
Why?
Because everything was slightly different. Different packaging, different snacks, different brands, different ways of displaying food. I wasn't even hungry.
You were sightseeing in a supermarket.
Pretty much.
That's actually one of my favorite things to do in another country.
Really?
Yes, you can learn a lot about everyday life from a supermarket.
That's true.
Tourist attractions show you what a place wants visitors to see. A supermarket shows you what ordinary people buy.
That's a good point.
You see what people eat for breakfast, what snacks are popular, what kinds of drinks are common, how food is packaged, how much things cost.
And you can discover things you've never seen before.
Exactly.
Although sometimes you don't know what you're buying.
That's part of the fun.
I once bought what I thought was a dessert.
And
It wasn't a dessert.
what was it?
Something completely different.
Did you eat it?
I tried.
And
Let's just say I learned to check the label.
that's a useful travel skill.
Especially when you can't read the language.
Technology helps now.
Definitely, translation apps have changed travel.
They really have.
You can take a picture of a menu and translate it.
Or scan a sign.
Or type an address.
Or speak into your phone.
It's incredible compared with how people traveled 20 years ago.
Although sometimes I think technology can make us less observant.
Oh,
If you have your phone doing everything for you, you may stop paying attention to where you are.
that's true.
You follow the blue line on the map and don't notice the streets around you.
I've definitely done that.
You arrive at the destination but can't remember how you got there.
That's happened to me many times.
Sometimes getting slightly lost is better.
As long as you're not really lost.
Of course.
There's a difference between I don't know exactly where I am and I have no idea where I am.
That's an important distinction.
The first one can be fun.
The second one can be stressful,
Very stressful.
especially at night.
Yes.
Have you ever deliberately gotten lost?
Yes, in cities that feel safe, I sometimes choose a street without checking the map.
And just walk.
Yes, I might have a general idea of the neighborhood, but I don't plan every turn.
What do you enjoy about that?
You find things you wouldn't have found if you followed a guidebook.
Like what?
Small cafes, local shops, parks, street markets, interesting buildings. Sometimes nothing special happens, but that's okay.
That's part of traveling too.
Not every moment needs to become a story.
Exactly.
Although sometimes the unexpected moments become the best stories.
That's very true.
I remember once looking for a restaurant while traveling. I had read about it online and thought it would be a nice place.
Did you find it?
Eventually,
And,
it was closed.
oh no,
The website said it was open.
classic.
I stood outside for a few minutes wondering what to do. Then I noticed a small restaurant across the street. It looked almost empty.
So you went in.
Yes,
Was the food good?
it was fantastic.
Better than the restaurant you'd planned to visit?
Much better.
That's why I don't like planning every meal when I travel.
Same.
If everything is booked in advance, you can miss the places you discover by accident.
But some planning is useful,
Definitely.
especially if you're visiting somewhere popular.
Right, there's a balance.
You need enough planning to avoid unnecessary problems, but enough flexibility to let the day surprise you.
That's probably true of travel in general.
And maybe that's another reason we behave differently when traveling.
Because we allow ourselves to be surprised.
At home, we know what to expect.
When we're traveling, uncertainty is unavoidable.
So instead of fighting it, we sometimes accept it.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
You can't control everything on a trip.
Flights get delayed.
Trains get canceled.
Restaurants close.
Weather changes.
You get lost.
You forget something.
Your suitcase goes somewhere without you.
That one is not fun.
No,
But once you accept that some things will go wrong, you may become less stressed when they do.
that's true.
I've noticed that I'm more patient with delays when I'm traveling.
Really?
Yes, if my train is delayed at home, I get annoyed because I feel like it's ruining my schedule. If I'm traveling and my train is delayed, I might think, okay, what can I do now?
Maybe because you're already expecting the unexpected.
Exactly.
Or because you're in a different mental state.
Probably both.
Travel can also change how we interact with strangers.
Definitely.
At home, you might avoid talking to someone you don't know.
But when you're traveling, you might ask a stranger for a recommendation.
Or start talking to someone on a train.
Or ask someone to take your photo.
That's a big one.
Yes.
There's something funny about asking a stranger to take your picture.
Especially when you have an expensive phone.
You have to trust them.
You give them your phone and say, "Could you take a picture of us?"
And then you stand there hoping they don't walk away.
Exactly.
I've had people take terrible photos of me.
Same.
The building is perfectly centered.
And you're almost completely missing.
Or they cut off your feet.
Or your heads.
And you have to say, thank you so much.
Even though the photo is awful.
Because they tried.
That's one of those universal travel experiences.
Definitely.
I've also had strangers take surprisingly good photos.
Me too.
Sometimes they understand the composition better than you do.
Maybe they have experience.
Or maybe they just get lucky.
Could be.
Another thing I've noticed is that travelers seem more willing to ask questions.
That's true.
At home, you might think, "I should know this."
But when you're in another country, it's normal not to know.
You don't know how the ticket system works.
You don't know which side of the road the bus uses.
You don't know how people pay.
You don't know what the local customs are.
So you ask.
And asking questions becomes part of the experience.
That can actually be useful for English learners too.
Absolutely.
If you're afraid to ask questions in English, traveling can force you to practice.
Yes, and many useful English conversations are very simple.
Does this bus go to the city center?
How much is a ticket?
Where can I buy ones?
Is there a restroom nearby?
Could you recommend a good restaurant?
What time does it open?
These aren't complicated sentences.
But they're extremely useful.
And once you've used them successfully, your confidence grows.
That's the important part.
You realize I managed that conversation.
Exactly.
Even if you made a few mistakes.
Mistakes don't matter as much when the communication works.
That's something people sometimes forget.
Yes, language isn't a test where every sentence receives a score.
It's a tool.
Exactly.
If the person understands you, you've achieved the main goal.
And if they don't understand, you try again.
Different words.
Slower speech.
A gesture.
A picture.
Whatever works.
That's real communication.
And travel gives you a lot of opportunities to practice it.
Especially if you travel somewhere where English isn't the local language.
That's interesting because you may actually speak more English with other travelers than with local people.
That's true.
You meet someone from another country, neither of you speaks the other's language, so you use English as a common language.
And suddenly you're having a conversation.
About where you're from, where you're going, what you've seen.
What food you've tried.
How long you're staying.
And you may never see that person again.
But you can have a surprisingly good conversation.
That's one of the nice things about travel.
Temporary friendships.
Exactly.
You can meet someone at a hostel, on a train, in a cafe, or during a tour.
Then spend a few hours together.
Maybe have dinner.
And the next day you go in different directions.
It's a strange kind of friendship.
But sometimes those short conversations stay with you.
Because they're connected to a particular place.
Yes.
Years later, you might remember, I met someone from Brazil on a train in Italy.
Even if you don't remember their name.
Exactly.
Travel creates these little stories.
And the stories often begin with something going wrong.
That's true.
You miss a bus.
You get on the wrong train.
You order the wrong meal.
You can't find your hotel.
You misunderstand someone.
Then later, that's the story you tell everyone.
Nobody wants to hear about the afternoon when everything went perfectly.
They want to hear about the time you ended up walking through the wrong part of town in the rain carrying a broken umbrella.
That sounds very specific.
It might be.
Did that happen to you?
Possibly.
I'm starting to think you have a lot of travel stories.
Maybe.
You should tell me the umbrella story.
Not yet.
Why not?
Because it's embarrassing.
Those are usually the best ones.
Fine, I was traveling with a friend and we'd planned to visit a famous viewpoint. The weather forecast said there might be light rain, so we brought one small umbrella.
One umbrella for two people.
Yes.
That was your first mistake.
Probably, we started walking and the rain became heavier. We opened the umbrella, but the wind was so strong that it turned inside out.
Of course.
We tried to fix it.
Did it work?
For about 30 seconds.
Then.
It broke completely.
So you were walking in heavy rain with a broken umbrella.
Yes,
And you still went to the viewpoint.
we did.
Why?
Because we'd already walked so far.
That's exactly what happens when you're traveling.
We reached the viewpoint completely soaked.
Was the view worth it?
Actually, yes.
There you go.
The clouds were moving across the hills, the rain had cleared slightly, and the whole place looked dramatic.
So the broken umbrella became part of a good memory.
Exactly.
And if you'd stayed in the hotel because of the rain,
We would have missed it.
that's the thing about travel. Sometimes the bad experience becomes part of the good experience.
Yes, the rain becomes part of the story.
The wrong train becomes part of the story.
The strange meal becomes part of the story.
The terrible photo becomes part of the story.
Exactly.
Maybe that's why travel memories can feel so vivid.
Because they're filled with unusual experiences.
Your brain pays attention when something is different.
Yes, a normal Monday at home can blur together with hundreds of other Mondays.
But a day when you got lost in a foreign city is much easier to remember.
Because it stands out.
So traveling may change us partly because we're paying more attention.
I think so.
We're noticing more.
We're learning more.
We're interacting with more people.
We're solving unfamiliar problems.
And we're creating new memories.
Exactly.
There's another thing I want to ask you.
Go ahead.
Do you think traveling changes the way people see their own country?
Definitely.
No.
When you experience different ways of doing ordinary things, you start noticing the habits you normally take for granted.
For example,
The way people greet each other, the way they eat meals, how they use public transportation, how shops operate, how people queue, what time they eat dinner.
those things can seem very normal at home.
Exactly, you don't notice them until you see another system.
Then suddenly you realize, oh, we do it this way.
Yes,
And someone from another country might think your way is unusual.
that's the interesting part.
Neither way is necessarily better.
Right,
They're just different.
exactly.
Travel can make you more aware of that.
It can.
Although sometimes travelers make the mistake of judging everything by the standards of home.
Yes, that's one of the easiest mistakes to make.
If something works differently, they assume it's wrong.
Instead of asking why it's different.
That's a big difference.
When you're traveling, curiosity is more useful than judgment.
That's a good sentence.
Thanks.
Curiosity asks, why do they do it this way?
Judgment says, why don't they do it the normal way?
And normal usually means the way I'm used to.
Exactly.
That's probably one of the biggest things travel can teach you.
That your normal isn't everyone's normal.
And your habits aren't universal.
Right.
Even something as simple as breakfast can be completely different.
Yes.
Some people eat sweet things.
Some eat savory food.
Some eat very little.
Some have a huge breakfast.
Some drink coffee.
Some drink tea.
Some eat at home.
Some eat outside.
And when you're traveling, all of those differences become visible.
Which makes ordinary life more interesting.
That's why I love trying local food.
What's the most unusual thing you've eaten while traveling?
That's difficult.
Give me one.
I once tried something I couldn't even identify.
You didn't know what it was.
Not before I ate it.
That's brave.
Or stupid.
Maybe both.
Someone recommended it and I thought, I've come all this way, I should try it.
What did it taste like?
Honestly, I don't know how to describe it.
That's not very helpful.
It was one of those flavors where you need another bite to understand it.
So you took another bite.
Of course.
And did you understand it?
Not really.
Did you like it?
Eventually, yes.
That's interesting.
Some foods require adjustment.
Definitely.
You taste something unfamiliar and your brain says, what is this?
Then after a few bites, it becomes less strange.
Exactly.
That happens with language too.
That's a good comparison.
At first, a foreign language can sound like one continuous stream of sound.
Then you start recognizing individual words.
Then phrases.
Then patterns.
And eventually, something that once sounded strange starts sounding normal.
So travel and language learning have more in common than we realize.
They do.
Both require you to become comfortable with unfamiliar things.
And both reward curiosity.
And patience.
Definitely.
And mistakes.
Lots of mistakes.
Travel without mistakes would probably be less interesting.
Maybe.
Although I'd still like my flights to arrive on time.
Of course.
We can enjoy uncertainty without wanting complete chaos.
That's probably the ideal balance.
You know, I think one reason people love travel is that it gives them permission to be different.
What do you mean?
At home, people may have a certain image of you. You're the person who always does this, always eats that, always goes to the same places.
People know your routines.
But when you're traveling, nobody knows you.
So you can make different choices.
Exactly.
You can wake up early.
Or sleep until noon.
Eat breakfast at 3 in the afternoon.
Walk 20,000 steps.
Talk to strangers.
Spend an entire afternoon in a museum.
Or sit in a park and do nothing.
Nobody knows what your normal behavior is.
That's true.
And maybe that freedom helps people discover parts of themselves they don't normally see.
It can.
Someone who thinks they're shy might suddenly have conversations with strangers.
Someone who thinks they hate walking might walk around a city all day.
Someone who never tries new food might order something completely unfamiliar.
Someone who always plans everything might have an unplanned afternoon.
And then they realize they enjoy it.
Travel can reveal possibilities.
Not necessarily because travel changes who you are.
But because it changes the environment around you.
And the environment changes your behavior.
Exactly.
That's a subtle difference.
It is.
Maybe we're not completely different people when we travel.
Maybe we're simply seeing a different version of ourselves.
I like that.
You don't have to become a new person every time you get on a plane.
Thank goodness.
You just need to allow yourself to experience something differently.
Try something.
Notice something.
Talk to someone.
Get a little lost.
And maybe eat something you can't pronounce.
Preferably after finding out what it is.
Fair enough.
Travel doesn't have to be expensive or dramatic either.
That's important.
You don't need to fly halfway around the world.
You can visit a nearby city.
Take a train somewhere you've never been.
Walk around a neighborhood you've never explored.
Try a restaurant you've never visited.
Even that can create the feeling of being somewhere new.
Exactly.
Sometimes the important thing isn't distance.
It's unfamiliarity.
That's a good way to put it.
A new environment makes you pay attention.
And attention makes experiences more memorable.
Yes,
Maybe that's why even a short trip can feel longer than a normal week.
because you're processing so much new information.
New faces,
New sounds.
new streets,
New food.
new words,
New routines.
new problems,
New solutions.
and new stories.
Exactly.
Which brings us back to where we started.
Why we become different when we travel.
Maybe we become more curious because the world around us is unfamiliar.
More flexible because plans don't always work.
More social because we need other people.
More observant because everything is new.
More patient because things don't always happen on our schedule.
And sometimes more confident because we solve problems we didn't expect.
That's probably the biggest one for me.
Confidence.
Yes, not the kind where you think you can do everything. The kind where you think, if something goes wrong, I'll figure it out.
That's a very useful kind of confidence.
And you can bring it home.
That's the interesting part.
You don't have to leave the travel version of yourself at the airport.
You can keep some of those habits.
Ask more questions.
Try new things.
Talk to people.
Notice your surroundings.
Be comfortable not knowing everything.
And accept that sometimes the wrong train takes you somewhere interesting.
As long as you eventually find your way back.
Of course.
I think I'd like to travel somewhere soon.
Where?
I don't know yet.
That's very appropriate.
Maybe that's the point.
Maybe.
Pick a place, learn a few useful phrases, pack a bag, and see what happens.
Just remember to check the train direction.
I was waiting for you to say that.
Someone has to.
And I'll bring an umbrella.
A strong one.
A very strong one.
Good.
Although knowing my luck, it'll be sunny the entire trip.
Then you'll have something else to complain about.
I won't complain.
We'll see.
Fair enough.
And maybe that's another thing travel teaches us. We don't need every moment to go exactly as planned.
Sometimes the unexpected part is the part we remember.
The wrong turn.
The unexpected meal.
The stranger who helped you.
The conversation you didn't plan to have.
The street you found by accident.
The restaurant you almost didn't enter.
The view you almost missed because of the rain.
And the story you tell years later.
Exactly.
So maybe the next time you travel, don't try to control every minute.
Leave a little room for curiosity.
And a little room for mistakes.
And definitely a little room for good food.
That's the most important part.
I knew we'd eventually agree on something.
We always do when food is involved.
That's probably a topic for another episode.
I'd be happy to volunteer.
I expected that.
Until then, keep exploring.
Keep listening.
Keep asking questions.
And don't worry too much if you don't understand everything the first time.
Whether you're traveling through a new city,
Or learning a new language.
the first step is simply being willing to experience something unfamiliar.
And once you're willing to do that, you may discover that you can handle much more than you expected.
Even a wrong train.
Even a wrong train.
That's a pretty good place to end.
I think so.
Then let's hope our next trip starts with the right train.
And ends with a good meal.
Now you're talking.
Always.